Steven Spielberg is my favorite director of all time, but I've never ranked his movies. With The Fablemans being nominated for Best Picture and being that it's semi-autobiographical, this seemed like the perfect time to stop and rank all 34 Steven Spielberg films from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. If you're up for the challenge, share your ranking of all 34 Steven Spielberg films. Or, what are some of your favorite Steven Spielberg films? My list is not the right list. It's just my list, and I would love to see yours. With that said, let's get started. In last place, 1941, one of the more interesting cinematic misfires of all time. Sandwiched in between some absolute Spielberg classics is this film, which was written by the creative team behind Back to the Future. It features an incredible, diverse cast, and it absolutely does not work.
Some things should work, but do they?
Less than 5 minutes into it, my wife was like, what on earth are we watching? What is this? And it's tough to even know how it got so far off course and what exactly is the missing piece here, but there's no shortage of talent in front of and behind the camera. But this World War II screwball comedy does not work.
I can assure you, there will be no bombs dropped here.
And I'm not sure if that's because Spielberg wasn't wired to do a screwball comedy, or if it's because the idea of a World War II screwball comedy is inherently a really bad idea, but it's so loud, it's so chaotic, it tries to do so many different things that there's just nothing really to connect with. There's no shortage of attempts at broad comedy, but 40 years later, it's just not funny and it does not work. Number 33, always in the late 80s, early 90s, there's this whole trend of these ghost movies where someone dies with unfinished business, so they come back to resolve the issues before they pass on to the next life. And this one is one of those, and it's fine. It's just utterly generic. It's kind of devoid of any of the Spielberg magic. There's nothing to make it stand out from any of the other ghost movies that came out around this exact same time, such as the movie Ghost. And so it's got a great cast. I guess it's competent in what it's doing, but it's just like just to be so sentimental the way that a lot of Spielberg movies do, while just not having really anything interesting to say or do or distinguish it in this genre. 32, the BFG. Now, I actually did read the BFG when I was growing up, and in particular remember all the whiz-poppin' jokes from the book about farting and popping up into the air, boosting yourself up into the air. But I never actually saw this film until preparing to do this video, and it just never really drew me in. The trailers looked a little bit off-putting, where the CGI's almost good enough, but there's just enough of that uncanny valley to make it very unsettling to me. And now having seen the film, that's kind of what it felt like, a movie where the tech just wasn't quite there. The CGI wasn't quite there to be able to pull off what they were going for if they wanted to try and do photorealistic. So it just felt a bit off to me. But beyond that, the story feels very episodic in the way that the tale plays out. It's a very odd mix of cutesy story with a lot of fart jokes as well as man-eating giants.
Please don't eat me.
You think because I'm a giant that I'm a man-gobbling cannibal?
Cutesy, lowbrow humor and giants eating children alive. You go, that's a little bit weird, and the tone feels that uneven and strange. So there's certainly certain charms to Rylance, who's phenomenal in pretty much everything that he's in, but it just doesn't feel like there's any of the Spielberg magic here. It feels like a movie that anybody really could have made. So just one that didn't really do anything for me, and I can't imagine rewatching. 31, The Adventures of Tintin. And this one, kind of like the BFG, kind of falls into that category of they tried to do this full animation, big, gigantic cinematic adventure with, they're not going for photorealistic with this film, but a certain amount of realism with the animation. And it falls just right into that creepy space where on the one hand, it absolutely was stellar animation with some jaw-dropping sequences, but the faces fall into that uncanny valley of creepiness that just was unsettling. It's a style that they tried to do in the zeros, early tens, that the tech just wasn't quite there yet. And I find all of those projects a little bit unsettling and creepy. But once you get beyond my issues with this style of animation and CGI, it just feels kind of like Indiana Jones light to me, animated. Which, when it does the chase sequence in the middle, that's a phenomenal sequence. Incredible staging, animation. Any way you spin it, that is a cool motorcycle chase sequence with the way that he captured it. All the Spielberg talent on display there. But once you get beyond that, it's Indiana Jones with less likable leads, less charismatic leads. I just don't really care about Tintin or any of these side characters, anything kind of going on related to it. And this is in particular frustrating when you realize that Edgar Wright was one of the people that worked on the script here. And I just don't feel there's any of that Edgar Wright wit, charm, magic here. So a movie with one stellar action sequence, but beyond that just feels like a lesser version of something I love and would much prefer to watch any of the Indiana Jones films to watching this one. Bringing us into the top 30, The Sugarland Express. This was Spielberg's first movie designed to get a theatrical release. Stars Goldie Hawn as well as William Atherton, and it's based off real-life events of essentially this slow-moving caravan car chase throughout Texas. That it has little moments in it where these kind of clueless people that are on the run from the police, that they're just so out of it that they don't realize there's no good ending to this adventure that they're on. And that sense of dread the audiences has as the characters are optimistic, I think that's when the movie kind of shines the best, when it really captures those two emotions at the same time, where the audience is ahead of the lead characters. But the inherent idea of a slow-moving car chase for 2 hours is not all that thrilling and exciting. And it doesn't have enough in there to justify the 2-hour runtime. So much like the nature of the chase itself, it's a pretty slow film. Has its moments of charm. It's the sort of film that it's like 50 years old now, so it has the pacing of a 50-year-old movie. Some of the humor probably doesn't translate cultural references, and I think some of that probably works against the movie in a lot of ways. But it doesn't. You see glimpses of what Spielberg was about to do with Jaws and Indiana Jones, but not quite enough of that. 29, War Horse, and this is just an absolute gut punch of a film. So to its credit, it absolutely makes you feel like you are experiencing the horrors of war, in particular World War I, the despair, the hopelessness, just how bleak of a war that it was, that this was not this heroic war with clear villains like the Nazis that you want to be taken out, that you want to see taken out. It's just a very depressing war that took a toll on everyone that it touched. It does that, but it also tries to have like this sentimental story about the impact of this war horse on people. And I just don't know that Spielberg schmaltz fits with the despair of war. And so just a movie that does draw out big emotions. I don't know that it's meaning to do all the things that or doesn't effectively do it as a whole. It doesn't feel cohesive. It just feels almost like audience torture at times, because there's such a disconnect between certain scenes in the film. Next up, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls. And I think a lot of people fail to give this movie credit for the things that it does well. It still does have some phenomenal stunt work in it at times, some cool action sequences. Spielberg knows how to stage action. And here with 21st century tech and everything, you get some really cool moments in this film. All of that said, it to me is also dramatically worse than all of the other Indiana Jones films for reasons that shouldn't be the case. It makes mistakes that it shouldn't make. Whether overuse of CGI and green screens, where I've had people argue with me, no, they actually did some of the stuff where they drove in the forest. Like, sure. And then there's shots where very clearly Shia LaBeouf is in front of a green screen sword fighting. They didn't dangle him between two cars and drive him through the woods as trees hit him in the nuts. That didn't happen. They didn't train monkeys on how to swing through the jungle on rope. Like, obviously, they had a bunch of CGI in here that just doesn't fit with the rest of the franchise. I think it went too spectacly in the final moments with the reveal of these alien creatures. There's corny moments in here that I just don't think belonged. So without question, I think it just strained a little bit too much credibility. It went too far with... There's always been a certain lack of belief or over-the-topness to the stunts and what Indiana Jones can survive. Surviving a nuclear blast in a fridge is a bit much, with especially the way they do it, them violently flying miles down the road. That causes damage to the human body. So a movie that I can appreciate a lot of what they were trying to do and what Lucas was thinking, but I think they were just bad ideas that don't actually mesh well with the other three films. It feels like this odd thing that wants to be different and be about aliens and inspired by 1950s alien invasion films in Russia, but it's in a franchise where that doesn't, it's trying to be like the old films while doing something new, and the newness and the oldness, they don't go together. 27, The Color Purple. This was a first time watch for me, and I went into it not really knowing what to expect. And I appreciated kind of its exploration of this time and a place and seeing a character throughout most of her entire life and all these kind of implications of things that kind of went down. And so it really shows you a time and what things were like in a way that doesn't romanticize it. But I felt that the tone was just so far off on the entire film, where the music just does not match what you're seeing in the film. There's like sequences where Danny Glover is discussing the value of beating your wife while like whimsical music is playing. There's like this aw shucks sentimentality and sense of humor in a movie that's filled with rape, incest, pedophilia, and abuse. And so I don't like, I haven't read the original book to know if maybe some of that's the vibe in there, and if Spielberg was just the wrong person to tell this story, where something got lost in translation. But there was like a story in here that was like, oh, that's interesting and compelling and some great performances with a tone that didn't fit. Then we have The Lost World, Jurassic Park, and this is a movie that for 27 years I've been trying to like it more than I actually do. I mean, I saw it opening weekend when it came out. Of course, I love the original Jurassic Park. It was the perfect age to be able to see like PG-13 movies and a movie about dinosaurs, and it was really good. So jump forward a few years, was so excited for this movie to come out, and I've just never liked it as much as I want to. I find it enjoyable just as a point of reference. By this point in time in our list, I'm giving these movies a mixed thumbs up. Like we're at the point in time like, yeah, these are good movies, but I think they're flawed. Like we're there. I would give this one a thumbs up. Mild thumbs up, but still a thumbs up. But like on the positive side, Spielberg knows how to stage a sequence. The trailer falling off the cliff sequence, awesome. in and of itself, the destruction in the third act with the T-Rex running through San Diego, it's a lot of fun to see his version of Godzilla or whatever you want to call it, King Kong, whatever you want to call it. It's fun to see that. There's a lot of action set pieces that are fun. I just don't think the story is here to where there's ideas about the second island, like, okay, yeah, that's kind of interesting, but they don't have enough of a plot for where to go with that. So it feels like there's kind of two ideas mashed together. This one about trying to go to the second island and try and escape from it. And then this tacked on third act that's a totally different plot about they take a T-Rex to San Diego that escapes and we do the third act of King Kong. Like it doesn't feel like they go together because this wasn't really set up in this first part. This part right here, the first two acts have a clear objective: survive, get off the island. Once that happens, it feels like the movie should be over with, but it's not. We still have 30 more minutes to set up a new plot, a new threat. So it's kind of a very odd way to structure a film. And just a big part of what elevated the first Jurassic Park was having this very balanced set of characters with different perspectives and just the allure of Jurassic Park itself. And like, what if dinosaurs were brought back? How would that be just enticing to everyone on a superficial sense? And then how would everyone respond to that? And this movie doesn't have something to replace that with. The original is one of the greatest adventure films of all time, as you'll see on this list. So I don't expect to be as good, but I think there is a gigantic missing piece there, both with the fullness of the cast, the ideas being presented, but the action itself is still, top notch. Spielberg at the top of his game. 25, Empire of the Sun. Much like The Color Purple, a movie that kind of takes you to a time and a place and explores kind of the experience of this character in a time that I hadn't really thought about the experiences of people in this situation. In particular, it stars a very young Christian Bale whose family lives in China when Japan invaded, and essentially he gets left behind and he's trying to survive. And it kind of shows you what that looked like as this child from this very rich elite family suddenly finds himself alone and then finding himself in these different places, different communities along the way while trying to survive World War II and be reunited with his family. So I think there's in general, interesting idea there of seeing something I hadn't seen before. There's obviously you have a young Christian Bale, so that's fascinating. We also have John Malkovich, a young Ben Stiller's in there, so some other solid actors. I never felt it quite as engrossing as I felt like it should be, and it feels like it goes on too long because it covers a lot. It's covering years and is trying to really establish who he was before and has all these different scenarios that he goes through, and so just it goes on for a while, and so it was a bit slow for not having enough payoff for some of what was going on while still having a lot in there that I did find interesting. 24, AI. Now, this is a film that I saw it in the theater when it originally came out, and I haven't rewatched it until this past fall when I was prepping for this video. And it's a movie which, on the one hand, is very effective at a lot of the things that it's trying to do, but I also don't feel like it knows exactly where it wants to go or where to land the ship. And I wonder if some of that is the interesting kind of backstory of where it came from, where eventually, obviously, Spielberg is the person that directed the film, but Kubrick was kind of in the mix for a while there. And I didn't fully understand the backstory of exactly how interconnected Kubrick was with it. But then Kubrick died, Spielberg directed the film, and it kind of feels a little bit like that. More of a Kubrick kind of idea being directed by Spielberg, and those are two directors with dramatically different styles and strength. And I've said it many times before, Kubrick makes movies that aren't really on my wavelength, so I respect them more than I enjoy them. And then, as I've stated in this video, Spielberg is my favorite director of all time. And so even some of that kind of disconnected, maybe Spielberg's trying to do something a little bit different for himself that has a bit of a darker streak to it, a more cynical bent to it. It's outside of his usual wavelength, and I feel that disconnect kind of in the whole film. What the movie does really well is this idea that I talked about multiple times earlier with Tintin and BFG, the idea of the uncanny valley, that when humans see a CGI face, there's just something there that we're so used to seeing real human faces and how they move that we can just tell something's off, and it's so close to being real, but also so clearly not real that it's off-putting to us that we reject it. And what I feel the movie AI does really well is that it takes that concept and it does that with the lead character of David, this child AI, to where he's an incredible technological achievement that is so close to being human, but always just a little bit off. And he's almost the perfect embodiment of the uncanny valley, not with CGI, but what if you could actually create this AI that's walking and engaging with you, that it's incredible that he's so close, but he's always that much off. So he's always so unsettling and creepy in everything that it does. And it makes that character the lead character. And there's something deeply sad about that, because he's just wants to belong and to be loved. And there's a sweetness to him. And he's always unbelievably creepy at the same time. And that idea right there, I think it does that so well. I just don't know that it has the story to capture that for a 2-hour runtime. And certainly as it kind of goes on and where it goes in the third act and it just kind of feels like this one really goes off the rails in my mind as just the stuff that happens in the last 15 minutes or so. Not my favorite elements of this film. So an interesting one, because there's a lot to talk about that's fascinating about its creation and why did Spielberg choose to do this one, and what they did with David was really cool. Story, I'm not as thrilled with. 23, Duel. This was Spielberg's first film. It was actually a made-for-TV movie that was eventually expanded upon and released in some theaters. And at its core, it's a very simple story about a man who angers a truck driver, and the truck driver just decides to take him out and starts chasing him. So it's this very simple, straightforward premise. It doesn't do anything to try and expand upon that, have a big character study. It's just meant to be this edge of your seat, tense thriller where it just keeps escalating. The tension keeps winding up more and more and more. And it's a TV movie that was supposed to be shot in 10 days. They were able to shoot it in 12 days. They did a little bit of extra shooting when it turned out better than they were expecting. And they decided to do some more releases of it. And through that, you get this movie that's actually pretty effective. Now, if you compare it to some of these movies right below this on the list of AI, Empire of the Sun, Lost World, those are much bigger, more extravagant films, more complex scripts, incredible ensemble casts. But with even the scope and size to them, I don't think they were as effective as this movie was. This movie is doing something very simple, and it's effective at that simple thing that it's doing. So sometimes that's where it's difficult to do these rankings, where it's like a little bit odd to have this very straightforward chase movie, essentially, above these much more ambitious projects. But I think it worked with what it was trying to do, in particular as a movie that's now over 50 years old, made as a TV movie. And this was followed by Sugarland Express. I felt that Duel, this TV movie, better demonstrated Spielberg's natural talent and what he was capable of than Sugarland Express did, which had a much bigger budget. I had Goldie Hawn in there. This movie, like, he did this 10, 12 days. That's pretty cool. Next up, Ready Player One. And this is my time where I get to say, oh, the book was better. Very rarely do I read the book before I see the movie, but in the case of Ready Player One, I actually had read the book multiple times. I absolutely loved the book, and finally I can be that pretentious jerk that essentially ruined what otherwise probably would have been a movie that I enjoyed quite a bit more simply by reading the book better. And with what books are able to do, they're able to just go more detail and elaborate world building, and certain scenarios, certain things that are really great in the book wouldn't translate to a film. And so that's the struggle I always have with this movie, is it's fun. I love all the Easter eggs. I love getting to see all these characters mashed together in this video ground playground, especially moving to the third act. It's like, wow, look at all this cool stuff happening. But as someone that knows what they were able to do with the book, this just feels like the simplified, dumbed down version of the book. And if you've read the book, the first third of it, it's extensively about the education system. And that's why the lead character is able to do what he's able to do. And it ties into the perspective of the blanking on the guy's name, but the built the Oasis and everything like that. There's all this detailed backstory of everything kind of going on there. And they simplify it in the movie into there's a race and you have to drive backwards. That's the sort of stuff like a race is so much more cinematic. It's so much more exciting than for a movie than what's in the book. But what's in the book is so much better. And that's where when you have to translate them and do what works in a movie as a visual format, you get the more simplified. Well, it's a chase. Drive backwards. And that's my bias going into it. I think this is a good movie. Once, as I said before, at this point in time, we're at the point in time where like these are all movies that I actually enjoy quite a bit, or less mixed on them. We're very close to the point in time where I'm like, these are all great here on out. We're very close to that point in time. Not quite there yet, but I think this is a good movie that's very enjoyable. And in particular, if you haven't read the book, you'll probably like it a lot more than people that aren't negatively comparing it to a book, which usually doesn't do the movie any favors. 21, The Terminal. I know this is one that some people really didn't like. I think it's harmless and enjoyable. Certainly, Tom Hanks is, of course, as charming as ever. It's unassuming, just kind of feel-good fun. Memorable? Not particularly. Is it a little bit too heavy-handed where everyone's either too nice or too mean? Not a lot of nuance in the characters? Yeah, sure. Sure, it, probably could have used a little bit more complexity in there. Schmaltzy, absolutely. You got a lot of that Spielberg schmaltz in here, but an enjoyable enough film. I mean, certainly, doesn't have a lot of his distinct style to it. Feels like a movie anybody could have directed. I don't know what drew him to this project at this particular point in time in his career, but it's enjoyable enough. It's good. Kicking off our top 20 Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I feel like at this point in time in the list, from here on out, you're dealing with a set of movies that are like Best Picture nominees, classics of genres, personal favorites. I mean, here on out, this is a tough list to make. And no matter what you do here on out, you're stepping on someone's toes because this is Spielberg. This guy has made the best of multiple genres across multiple decades and is still getting Best Picture nominees. Hence even the context of making this video right now. And so I look at the next 5 movies on this list. There's classics of genre. There's Best Picture nominees. There's movies from my childhood. This is a tough list, and we're only at the top 20. And that brings us to Close Encounters of the Third Kind, a very beautiful but slow film that, I've seen it a handful of times over the last 30 years. And it's a movie that I usually feel like I respect it more than I fully enjoy it. It's a blockbuster from a different era. As his follow-up to Jaws, on a story level, it's very different from Jaws, but there's a lot of similarities in the storytelling, scene setups, the pacing, of course. But I feel like the characters here aren't nearly as compelling as they were in Jaws, in which case you're not as interested in them in some of these slower scenes that are dialogue based and the journey that the characters are on. It's not quite as interesting here as it was in Jaws. So that's kind of one of the reasons it's lower on the list. Is I just don't get as invested in it. But still, like I said, this is where the list gets really tough because he's Spielberg and he has an incredible filmography. No matter what types of movies you like, he's got a lot of fantastic ones. You look at this movie, some awesome old school visual effects. The music, of course, is incredible. I would say this movie has the Spielberg magic, but not the Spielberg energy. And it just feels a little bit lifeless when you consider how lively Jaws gets in the third act, and Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, just a couple years after this, not quite captures what he did in those films and so many others throughout his career. Next up, War of the Worlds. This is another one that I saw in the theater when it first came out and didn't rewatch it until prepping for this video. And I feel like it's an effective enough Spielberg sci-fi disaster film without ever being as good as maybe it should be in light of where Spielberg was at in his career, the source material he was drawing from, and of course having Tom Cruise in the lead of his film. So to state the obvious, when it's doing the disaster sequences, they're phenomenal, just incredible scope, scale, size. Spielberg knows how to do all of that stuff and have it be absolutely awesome. There's some other things in here that I don't think work quite as well. The opening narration is super cheesy. And this is a weird role to cast Tom Cruise in because he's playing a failing everyman who's as charming as Tom Cruise is. And they also present him as knowing how to do a lot of stuff. Like he's a very know how, get it done kind of guy, but he's also just also presented as this guy that doesn't have his life together. It's just a very different type of role for Cruise to just kind of be thrown into. And he doesn't immediately embody that because he usually plays such competent heroes in his films. Just in general, I think the family drama stuff was all kind of overcooked. The son is too irresponsible, just too he literally runs towards soldiers to join a war in ways that just felt kind of forced. So it wasn't crazy about all of that. There's some cliches of the crazy guy in a bunker that wants to help that is actually really dangerous. But like I said, it's effective at the stuff that it needs to be effective at. It's competent enough in the way that it's done. But it's, just if I'm looking to watch a Spielberg disaster film, there's some other big sci-fi spectacle films. This probably isn't the one that I naturally gravitate to. Number 18, The Post, and this was a film that was nominated for Best Picture. That's once again where this list gets real interesting because his Best Picture nominees don't even crack the top 15 sometimes. But so it's a movie that's tackling essentially the news side of the Watergate scandal and how did that story break and what was everything that had to go down with all the negotiations and people putting their reputations on the line in order to expose some of the corruption that was going on.
Nixon will muster the full power of the presidency, and if there's a way to destroy you, by God, he'll find it.
And it takes subject matter that you would normally think, how does an article get published by a newspaper? You don't immediately think super compelling stuff, and it makes it very interesting, and it makes it tense, and you feel that growing as you go throughout the film. Incredible star-studded cast as you're watching it. As I was putting this list together, it was one that was a little bit tough for me to place because this was a first-time watch for me as I was doing this. And when I did my first draft of this, which was very early, it was actually months ago, I had it a little bit higher on this, oh, that was really cool, sucked me in. And then as I went to try to explain what I liked about the film, I didn't have a whole lot to say. So it's one of those movies that is effective while you're watching it, but didn't really stick with me afterwards. So make of that as you will. 17, Hook. And this is a movie that I grew up watching. I saw it opening weekend when it came out. I had all of the toys. In fact, I still think I have some of the toys unopened in some containers in my garage because back when I was growing up, we would buy toys to collect them and save them for later to sell them or something like that, which 30 years later, we still haven't sold any of them. So either they have been utterly wasted in the fact that we've stored them for 30 years or they're worth $15 now or something like that. Anyway, that's a little bit of a rabbit trail. I had the VHS tape. I watched it all the time. And certain things about it are absolutely iconic. If you're going to tell a story about Peter Pan growing up, Spielberg, Robin Williams, fantastic picks where, especially with a Robin Williams, he's a guy that, of course, has this incredible youthful manic energy, but he's also a dramatic actor. So he can play the jerk at the beginning and play it dramatic and straight. And then when he transitions, he can become the Pan, as he's supposed to do later in the movie.
Lion, crying, spine, prying, ultra pig!
You lewd, crude, rude, bag of pre-chewed food, dude.
Peter!
And so on so many levels, It's like the perfect team to do this. I think it's a movie that's not quite as good as you think it should be on rewatch and on full evaluation. There's a few ideas in there that are a little bit heavy-handed, some strange execution with some of the stuff that they do with Hook and Peter Pan's son and what it's kind of trying to do with all of it. I don't know that it all fully gels together, but of course it's an adventure classic. It's Spielberg doing a Peter Pan movie like that. That's awesome. And it has humor, it has stakes, it has adventure, it's got tragedy.
Looky, looky, I got hooky.
It's got a little bit of everything in there. This is just a very competitive list. Next up, Bridge of Spies. This is another first-time watch for me. And I went into it not really knowing what to expect. Like, what is going on here? I don't know how to interpret the trailer that I'm watching. And I found this to be a very compelling Cold War drama that's just this fascinating look at two men dedicated to doing what's right as well as their responsibility. And, you know, the Cold War has been explored in a number of different contexts and in a number of different ways. I haven't seen anything like this before. That's legitimately about a negotiator that is just trying to get the most out of different things and playing all these different sides and trying to figure out what everybody wants to try and deliver the biggest bang for everyone. So it's a win-win-win all around. And it's just kind of like took something that I wouldn't think that I would find that interesting and found the compelling aspects inside of it. It showed the hypocrisy of the Red Scare and so much of what was going on. So this is a movie that I really didn't know what to expect and almost immediately found myself much more interested than I was thinking. And great performance from Mark Rylance, recurring theme in some of these little reviews in here. So another one kind of like The Post, where I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed it when I watched it. Here we are a few months later. I don't have as much to say. Like, what specifically did I enjoy? It didn't leave as big of a mark as some other films on this list. It didn't have that wow factor, but a movie that was much better than I was expecting. Number 15, West Side Story. Musicals are absolutely not my thing, but this was just a well-made film. And once again, we're at a point in time in this list where I'm pretty much only going to be raving about all the movies from here on out, where just his top 15 are really good. And you could trade out most of the five below this also in there of just movies that are just really good, very entertaining, or great dramatic pieces. And when it comes to West Side Story, as someone that's not really into this sort of thing, wasn't looking forward to seeing a new version of West Side Story. You're talking about a top-tier filmmaker taking an iconic musical that's based off of Romeo and Juliet, and it's a classic adaptation of it, but with all of the technological advances of 21st century cinema. So it's not trying to reinterpret or reinvent the wheel. It's just doing an incredibly slick, glossy, classic musical. And in doing so, it looks gorgeous. Everything's choreographed and shot to perfection. Because it is, root goes all the way back to Shakespeare and the roots of the story and what they were doing with it. It packs an emotional punch, and it just fires on all cylinders. 14, Lincoln, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, tackles one of the most interesting Americans of all time and one of the most pivotal moments in American history. And in doing so, you get a film that naturally is captivating, intriguing, and at the same time, I don't think it's necessarily as good as it might have been, simply because it focuses so much in on like the legal, political aspects of something that's so deeply emotional and personal that it takes stuff that normally like politicians working backroom deals to pass laws, and that's not normally what average Joes are like, oh, this is really interesting. But as soon as you make it about the end of slavery and Abraham Lincoln is the mastermind behind it in the middle of the Civil War, It elevates subject matter that otherwise is not the most compelling. And so I kind of wish that if you're going to get a Spielberg Lincoln film about Civil War and end of slavery, this isn't necessarily the way that I would have wanted it to be done necessarily, but it's still an incredible achievement that can be very moving at times, fascinating.
We're stepped out upon the world stage now, with the fate of human dignity in our hands. Blood's been spilled to afford us this moment. Now!
And you're taking maybe the greatest living actor, putting him in one of the most important people of American history. And so you're just getting like just such a transformative performance to where it's like you don't see Daniel Day-Lewis, you see Abraham Lincoln, and it's just a true transformative acting.
Shall we stop this bleeding?
What you're seeing in this film. So, yeah, just if you haven't seen it, you should check this one out. Next up, Munich. This was a first-time watch for me and a fairly cold watch. I don't recall having seen the trailers for it previous to watching the movie. Wasn't familiar with the real-life events that inspired the film. So kind of went in not knowing much of anything about it and kind of just got sucked into this tale of revenge that to some extent is a real story. Which parts were embellished, which parts were made up, depends on which source you believe in regards to all of this, and certainly this creative license being taken because it's a movie. But there was a real-life massacre tied to the Olympics, and it led to this revenge mission, and the movie captures that. And what it does really well is having this story about these tense missions that they're on, where you're kind of buying into their quest for vengeance at first, and then you pretty quickly realize, like, violence spawns more violence, and the soldiers are very often the additional victims in all of this that are being used, no matter what the situation is. And so there's a little paranoia, there's a little revenge, a little action. It's got all of it in there. Very much my kind of film, and a different type of film from Spielberg. Number 12, Minority Report. And this movie combines together a bunch of things that I thoroughly enjoyed. Obviously, Steven Spielberg is my favorite director of all time, as I've told you many times during this video. Tom Cruise is a fantastic entertainer. I love sci-fi and adventure, and it's based off of one of Philip K. Dick's writings, and he's one of these guys. Stuff like Total Recall is based off of his works. Blade Runner just has these very thoughtful, interesting stories that lend themselves to sci-fi movies that have adventure but also are more thoughtful and interesting than the average sci-fi film. And you get that with this movie as well, where you get all of the exciting, thrilling Spielberg action that you'd expect, while also being this fascinating exploration of what would it look like if you could predict crimes in the future and people could be sentenced for crimes they haven't committed yet, and how would that potentially be abused by people? So combining like intrigue with action, adventure, sci-fi, interesting concepts all pulled together. I don't enjoy it as much as some of the other Philip K. Dick adaptations, in particular. Love Total Recall, but still just a great sci-fi film. Number 11, Amistad, and this was a first-time watch for me, and I thought this was just a great film. One where I didn't really know much about what the film was about. I knew it had elements about slavery and a ship. That's all I kind of, and Matthew McConaughey was in it. That was kind of like what I knew about the film. And it's based off real life events, and it's essentially a courtroom drama that's also kind of exploration of just how horrifying slavery was, the slave trade was, but also showing the long journey that led up to the Civil War of everything they tried to do beforehand to try and end slavery and stop this cruel treatment. And so just like a very interesting, compelling courtroom film in a very different setting, in a very different type of way than your typical courtroom film. And likewise, a very different exploration of slavery, where there's the usual stories about it, but you realize so much of slavery being legal is a legal issue. And so you realize there's like the long legal journey to undo just these horrible atrocities. And so the movie is able to go to incredibly dark places, but also be very uplifting at the same time.
If we are to have any semblance of order in this courtyard,
give us free! Give us free!
And so I just touched on a very full spectrum of emotions that I really wasn't even expecting going into the film. Kicking off our top 10, Catch Me If You Can. The story about this very young con man that essentially is able to con his way into a bunch of different professions through fraud, and he's being chased down by Tom Hanks. It's supposedly based off real life events, though that has been very much called into question. But as a movie, it is just a fun little film that can be funny. It can be thrilling. It's about friendship. It's about loneliness. It's just kind of an interesting sort of story about this highly competent con man, that what would it really take to con your way into certain positions, and how would you outsmart people? So it just kind of, we put all the ingredients together while anchoring it with Tom Hanks and Leonardo DiCaprio. You just have a very enjoyable film. But even like in smaller roles, this was the first movie that I saw Amy Adams in. And even though she's not a big part of the film, her small role in the movie made her pop, even as this actress that I maybe had seen in Smallville at the point in time I saw this movie in one episode. But she stood out because obviously she's had that kind of star presence, and just a movie that is really enjoyable. You connect with all the characters. You're invested in everything taking place. So if you haven't seen this one, check it out. Number 9, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Now, I know there's a lot of people that feel like this is the weak one in the original trilogy. I'm not that person. I think all 3 of the original trilogy of Indiana Jones films are just fantastic and a ton of fun. And while this might be the weakest of the original trilogy, I still love it. And in a lot of ways, I feel like this one has the most thrilling third act, where you get about 60% of the way through this movie, and then it just goes into high gear, and it's just action, chases, stunts, everything for like the whole last 40% of this movie. It's just an absolute thrill ride. And, Willie is pretty awful and annoying. But beyond that, short round, great, fun idea to give Indy a sidekick, but in a way that it even kind of adds to his kind of scoundrel-esque aspect, where at the beginning he's dealing with all these shady characters and stuff, but then he's sent on a mission that is actually a rescue mission, whereas the other movies are about, trying to get artifacts and tracking things down. This one really is. He's supposed to rescue these children while there is an artifact involved in it, but his purpose is saving these kids. But these movies are about Harrison Ford doing his thing while being in just these thrilling action sequences. And this movie is just jam-packed with big, exciting sequences. So I put this one on as much as I put on the other ones. And I think it delivers on all the stuff that I want from an Indiana Jones film. Next up, The Fablemans, the movie that spawned the creation of this particular ranking. It's a semi-autobiographical film about Spielberg's childhood. It's fictionalized. It's about the Fablemans, not the Spielbergs, but it's designed to capture the essence of his childhood, the family dynamics that he dealt with, as well as his discovery of filmmaking, and how he used that to cope with the drama of his childhood, as well as some little anecdotes that really did kind of happen at little certain times in his life, at least according to him. Supposedly some of this stuff happened, and it was nominated for Best Picture. And I just thought it did a great job of merging together coming-of-age story, family drama, and love and exploration of cinema, where you have this lead character whose family, or you're tracking him over years as he grows up, while his parents' marriage is not healthy and it has issues, and you're kind of watching the deterioration of this family while he's growing older. And the thing that kind of becomes his steadying point is making movies.
You stop making movies, it'll break your mother's heart.
That's one of the things that pulls the family together, and it's this pivotal piece and many of the anecdotes in the story. And you're watching as he learns to love telling stories and learns how to tell stories through images with sound, how to use effects, and how different things can move people in different ways. And in doing so, it's able to explore movies in cinema in a non-pretentious way, in an accessible way, while telling a story that has very human connections, big emotions, plenty of little laughs to keep it entertaining, but also celebrates film and filmmaking, and in a lot of ways informs the audience on the magic of filmmaking. So I just loved all of those things about this film, and it was one of my favorite movies of this year. I think it was like number 2, number 3 on my list, something like that. It is way up there on my ranking of 2022 films. Number 7, Saving Private Ryan, one of the most celebrated war films of all time and many people's favorite war movie of all time. And for good reason. It is able to tell a story which has thrilling war sequences, massive battle sequences in the movie, as well as personal small-scale ones, without romanticizing war. And at the core of the story is this mission motivated by the most simple of emotions, the desire to protect a mother from losing another son. It's driven by emotion rather than logic, and that's able to create this interesting moral question that runs throughout the entire film, where every one of these soldiers on this mission knows that their life is being put in danger in order to save someone else's life. But that means, like, there's this value statement in that we value Private Ryan's life and his mother's emotional state more than your life and your family's emotional state. And you understand the reason for the mission, why it's taking place. And at the same time, it's emotion-based. It's not logical. And saving a life is a simple concept. It gives a clear mission, but war is messy. And the choices you have to make are unclear. And so it's able to work on a lot of levels and touch on a lot of emotions, as well as tickle the brain a little bit of like, should they be on this mission? Is this wrong? And you can root for the heroism of it, that they're choosing to lay down their lives to save him. They're choosing to put themselves in danger to save him. You can celebrate that while also wondering, was it the right thing to do? Was it the right call? And look at it from that perspective of that's why war is awful. That those choices have to be made, where there is no right choice. There's just different bad choices, different bad options, but it's able to have incredible war sequences, big, gigantic emotions, and all at the same time while feeling cohesive. When you kind of pair this movie with like a Schindler's List, you get this very holistic look at World War II, the Holocaust, that shows how horrifying the Holocaust was, shows how horrifying war is, but also manages to show the hopefulness as well. That even in the worst of situations, seeing the worst of people, the worst of the human experience, the best of people can come out too. And there's still little moments of redemption and things like that. And that's one of some of the stuff that I think was just so neat about what he did during the 90s. Number 6, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. If Raiders of the Lost Ark didn't exist, this would be the greatest straightforward adventure film of all time. And in certain ways, it tops Raiders of the Lost Ark. This is a funnier film. I think it has maybe some bigger emotions to it. And if you're going to follow up Raiders of the Lost Ark, how do you make an equal film to go along with it? How do you capture the same energy without just rehashing what worked before? You make Indiana Jones's father James Bond. And by luck or by the fact that you're talking about two of the top stars of the last 100 years, Harrison Ford and Sean Connery just have incredible on-screen chemistry where they play off of each other so well. And while they're actually only 12 years apart in age, you buy into the fact that Sean Connery is Indiana Jones's father. You see the one person that can throw Indiana Jones off. And it's just such a great change of pace for this franchise. Like the exact thing that it needed to do something fresh, different, and new that fit, that helped us without undermining Indiana Jones. How do we keep exploring him? You bring in his father. It was just such a great idea. And the perfect actor and the perfect chemistry, everything was so good about it, while still having all the great action sequences, still all the fantastic stunts that you want from these movies. Another phenomenal John Williams score, something I haven't mentioned nearly enough in this list. John Williams has scored most of these movies, and all of the scores were phenomenal. And another, like all three of these original Indiana Jones movies just had great scores. I mean, we remember the Raiders March. But beyond that, there's all these other themes in there that are just so good, so memorable, and so effective at evoking the right emotions for the film that they're in. And you get that once again here. This one in particular just has the perfect, like, whimsical nature during these action scenes with his dad that are a little bit goofy, but it's like just the right amount. Like the music fills it out. And then there's these emotional scenes, these reverent scenes. It's so good. And like Raiders of the Lost Ark, as you get into the finale, Temple of the Doom did the slam bang for the last 40%. This one, once again, it's still captivating and interesting without it needing to be a slam bang finale. The final action sequence ends 25 minutes before the movie's over with. And then we're, trying to go through the traps and the discussion of which cup and everything like that. But it's so good. On a superficial, like, accessibility entertainment level, this one in certain ways I think is better than Raiders. But I think Raiders is the original, is just such a fresh original film that there's something special about it. But we'll get to that one in just a moment. In fifth place, E.T., the greatest boy and his dog story of all time, as it's a movie about this boy without a father because his dad's gone because of divorce. And then this alien that shows up who's trying to get back to his home, and the bond that forms between the two of them. And it's a movie that, it's been such a big part of the popular culture, the zeitgeist, for 40 years now, that it's easier to forget how powerful it really is. It's cute, it's charming, it's funny, but it really does have this full spectrum of emotions that I'd kind of forgotten about until, rewatched it this past fall with my own kids, who are about the age that I was when I watched it for the first time. And just the curiosity, the simple nature of the way that this bond forms and how much you just buy into them so quickly, and how horrifying it is when E.T. starts to get sick, and how uplifting it is when he starts to get better.
E.T. phone home.
And all of it just filled out by just a phenomenal John Williams score. That the ability of a John Williams score to just elevate a scene and dramatically shift everything that you're experiencing, because it's just every right note to just capture the emotion and make you believe that this bike is flying. And that he has so many scores that were absolutely perfect. Like, I don't know that, like, what it even means to do a ranking of John Williams scores, because he has so many perfect scores that absolutely nail the emotion, the adventure, the magic, the wonder. And that's what this movie does, is you see a boy start flying in front of the moon as the music lifts up, or the chase at the end, or as the ship, all of it, it's special. And it's a movie that they don't make blockbusters like this anymore. You think this is the highest grossing movie of all time when it came out 40 years ago. And it's an adventure and there's little chases in there, but it's compared to modern day blockbusters, it's so small scale. But it was special.
I'll be right here.
And it was about the characters, and it was about connections. And you kind of miss that now, where everything just feels like it needs to be overblown and bigger than the last blockbuster. There's something different about the way they did movies back in the day, and you kind of miss that we don't have movies like this being made in this manner anymore. In fourth, Schindler's List, Spielberg's dramatic magnum opus and his look at the Holocaust, and it is a truly unforgettable experience watching this film, as it doesn't shy away from the absolute atrocities of the Holocaust, the desperate measures that children went to survive everything going on, the cruel inhumanity that went on for years, but finds a way to tell this horrifying story while also just having little glimmers of hope and redemption in there, in particular with the journey of Oskar Schindler, who starts off as this war profiteer and by the end of the story is just desperate to save as many people as he can as he grows and he changes. And that, as I mentioned before, combined with Saving Private Ryan, of not shying away from everything that made the Holocaust, World War II, horrific, what makes war awful, the ways man can be so cruel to a fellow man. It doesn't shy away from any of that. But it also doesn't forget the goodness in man. That there is that other side to it, even in the worst of situations, even in the most dire of circumstances, the most horrifying of real life events. There's still greatness in people and those great moments. And I feel Schindler's List is able to balance that of really just experiencing so much of just horrific history. It's not just a story, but it's real life events, but also having that glimmer of hope in there. I just was so well done. And it even has ends on almost an uplifting note, but never forgetting the dire cost of so much of it and balancing that so well.
There will be generations because of what you did.
I didn't do enough.
You did so much.
The thing that kind of holds this one back is it's the kind of movie that you only watch once. You're like, I'm so glad I experienced that, but I don't need to. You just throw this one on a Saturday night. It's truly a draining film to experience. And when you're looking at the top 5 on here, maybe the top 10 on here, you're talking about movies that are the best of their genre. They're the best of what they're trying to do. And kind of a matter of preference of sorts. I don't know how you rank best of the bests of different genres, but that's what I feel like I'm doing with the top, 7, 8 movies on this list. Real quick before I give you the top 3, be sure to join me down below in the comment section if you're up for the challenge. What is your ranking of all 34 Steven Spielberg films? Or what are your favorite Spielberg films and what's your least favorite Spielberg films if you want to give me a couple of top 3s on there. Also, I've done a bunch of these director rankings. Christopher Nolan, David Fincher, Quentin Tarantino, M. Night Shyamalan, James Wan, all kinds of directors. You can check those out in this playlist right up here if you like these types of videos once this video is over with. In third place, Jaws, the original blockbuster and the movie that really put Steven Spielberg on the map. Now, I actually didn't watch this movie growing up, and then I met my wife, started dating her, and I was like, yeah, Spielberg's my favorite director. And she's like, yeah, Jaws is my favorite movie. And I went, I've never seen Jaws. And she's like, what? How have you never seen Jaws? And so since then, over the last 18 years that we've been together, I've watched Jaws many, many, many times. And as you can tell from its placement on this list, it's just a phenomenal movie that, kind of like E.T., it's a blockbuster in a very different sense. They just don't make movies like this anymore, where at its core, it's a simple story about a shark showing up at a beach and eating people and them trying to stop the shark. But when you go beyond that, it's really about these characters and their different responses to the shark. And like, how does this sheriff who doesn't really like the water end up at this particular city? And he's trying to balance all these forces, and he decides to go for what the mayor tells him to do rather than what his gut tells him to do. And that has dire consequences, and that weighs on him. And it's so much of a character study, and it's so much about these great characters and the dialogue between them, while also just happened to being about a shark eating people and trying to stop that shark. And that's when you have a movie that's special, where it works on multiple different levels. And the superficial side, the hook that gets you to go see it, that's awesome. But between the shark attacks, you love these characters, and the interactions between them matter just as much as the shark eating people.
You're going to need a bigger boat.
And, you know, even beyond that, just adds kind of the thriller, the horror aspects of it. You know, the movie infamously, during the production, the shark infamously gave them some trouble, and so they weren't able to show it as much as they originally planned to. And then they ended up using that to great effect, where the looming sense of the shark and the introduction of John Williams' very simple but incredibly effective score becomes even more terrifying than seeing the shark itself. So when it does appear, it's that much more shocking and horrifying. Just those little things, that the accidents, the mistakes, the intentional choices, the great source material, the amazing script, and one of the greatest directors of all time, or as I would say, the greatest director of all time, getting his moment to make his mark. And he absolutely pulled it off. So it's just a phenomenal film. Our runner-up, Jurassic Park, and I was just the absolute perfect age when this movie came out. I was in middle school. I was right at that age where I was starting to be allowed to go see the PG-13 movies, but also young enough that there was enough novelty to getting to go see something like that. And they're going to do a big, gigantic movie about dinosaurs. And it turned out to be one of the greatest movies ever made, and one of the greatest blockbusters of all time, that, like Jaws, like many of the other classic Spielberg films, it superficially has all the thrilling, excitement, adventure that you want, with dinosaurs chasing after people, or in Jaws, a shark chasing after people. It has that. And it's the best that's ever been done, and the perfect blend of practical and CGI, even though it's 30 years old now. Still looks incredible. Looks better than some of the more recent films that had 25 years of CGI advancement. Looks incredible. Awesome sequences. But beyond that, it's also a movie that has all these interesting ideas and characters that you care about, that bring different perspectives to the table. So you have this interesting idea of what if dinosaurs were brought back, and the movie decides to, or in the book, explore that from all these different perspectives of the dinosaur expert, the chaositician, the lawyer, the theme park guy, all these different people looking at it, and they see something different. Everyone is in awe of it, but others see the danger, others see the money, others see the potential, others are just exist, they're stuck in the awe and they're ignoring everything else. And therefore the conversations between them are captivating. So much so that when you rewatch the movie, you realize it's 60% of the way through the film until the fences shut down and the disasters, the chaos begins. But you don't mind, because you're in awe of the dinosaurs when you see them, and the wonder at first. And then you're drawn into the discussions from these lively, interesting characters. And then you move into the back half that delivers on the promise of the premise of what if dinosaurs were let loose in this park, and it's as thrilling as exciting as you want. And all the little details are perfect, where you have the adventurer who's a good man but doesn't like kids and is stuck with a pair of kids. And so through that, he learns to, have fun with them. That's the interesting character to put with kids, and the right backstory to make that just one little rub there, that he actually doesn't like the kids at the beginning of the movie, and that he's the one that has to spend time with them. But because he's a good man, of course he will do that and put his life on the line to do anything to save them. That's compelling stuff. As simple as it is, it's compelling, and the right choice. And the whole movie, the right choice after right choice. As we've been talking about in almost all of the top 10 here, it's just a magical John Williams score. That when they do that first scene where they see the dinosaurs and that main theme comes in and builds up, it's just, you feel like you're seeing dinosaurs for the first time as they are, because it perfectly embodies the emotion. The way that Spielberg slowly does the reveals with the way that they drive up and that they're drawn to these flowers or the plants and looking at the wrong places, then you slowly see their different reactions, and they're seeing something tremendous as the John Williams score swells in, and then it's revealed there's dinosaurs and we get to see them. You feel what they feel in that moment.
You did. You crazy son of a bitch, you did.
And they're not even real. They didn't feel anything. They're just actors playing characters. It's just something special. And I've had even some discussions with some friends like, why don't we have more blockbusters like this? You just got to think. Jurassic Park is the greatest filmmaker of all time in his prime, adapting the best book from one of the top novel writers of the last 40 years. So the best source material from the best director at the right moment in time. It was the best of everything. Everything came together perfectly. Even the moment in time of like right as we're getting CGI and right as we're moving past model work to where they're still afraid of CGI. They didn't overdo it. And so they tried to protect what you could see and what they did with models. So they actually didn't overdo it with the CGI. So it's seamless. You don't know what's CGI and what's a model, and the way that it was perfect. All the things came together to deliver a fantastic blockbuster that absolutely stands the test of time. It's thrilling. It's thought-provoking. It's all the stuff. But coming in first place, Raiders of the Lost Ark. As a guy that loves action-adventure films, to me, this is the quintessential action-adventure film. It's the one that created the template that every movie's been copying for 40 years. It was Spielberg and Lucas at their prime, and that, like, a magical time period of just two guys that were on a different level as filmmakers, and in the middle of what Spielberg's rise to taking over Hollywood, and George Lucas in the middle of the original Star Wars trilogy, like, let's do this adventure film. And it was just something special, where Indiana Jones is our hero, and he's very intelligent, competent, handsome, good looking, but he's also always in over his head.
I don't know. I'm making this up as I go.
He's always making it up as he goes along. He's not portrayed as actually a particularly good guy. He's going out trying to, take all these artifacts to put them in museums. He's doing it chasing glory. It's not really for altruistic purposes, at least not in this film. And, he gleefully kills Nazis. And even the fact that Nazis are the bad guys so that you can have our hero gleefully killing Nazis. And you're like, yeah, I'm okay with him gleefully killing all these people because, well, they're Nazis. But you have this very rough around the edges protagonist. And that's why he's the quintessential adventurer, that he's not the archetype of the just do-gooder. He's an adventurer. He's a true adventurer that lives for the prize of getting the thing. And he has room to grow and change as he goes along. And I've even seen some videos on YouTube where there's an arc that if you watch the Indiana Jones films in chronological order, Temple of Doom, Raiders, and then Last Crusade, where he becomes a much better person over the course of those films. And it was a really good exploration. But in this movie, you see him in the middle of that, where he's not the best of guys. And that's what I love about so much of it. He is just drawn towards the fortune and glory as the Nazis are in certain ways, or at least the Nazi conspirators, not Hitler and his desire to get weapons to win the war, but the ones that are teaming up with him. Anyway, over the years, there have been bigger and flashier set pieces, even in the Indiana Jones films. But I don't know how many have been as effective and iconic as what they did in this movie, where they're just trying to think, what are like the cool, interesting things that you can do? And from beginning to end, every action sequence in this movie is memorable. Whether the intro part where he's in the temple and he's trying to decide how to grab the skull, the bar fight, the car chase, of course, all of it, it's iconic. It stands out, and it laid the foundation that created the template that everyone has been copying. The score is playful and adventurous, as we've been talking about with so many of these John Williams scores. As someone that loves this genre, this is the movie that perfected the adventure film. And over 40 years later, it is still the definitive adventure film. So as a guy that loves this genre, as a guy that loves Spielberg, this is the movie that comes in at number 1 for this guy. If you enjoyed this video, remember I've got a bunch of these other director rankings: Nolan, Tarantino, Fincher, M. Night Shyamalan, Favreau, and so many more. You can check that out right over there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.